There's been a lot of fear going around recently about antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Some people fear that it's going to be the end of the world because of this, and are in fact more afraid of this than they are of nuclear war. But this is a problem that is exclusive to hospitals. These resistant bacteria cannot survive for long outside of this environment, and I'll explain why. First off, we need to understand how bacteria acquire this resistance in the first place. Most people know it's from overuse of antibiotics, but what's going on at a fundamental level? Basically, what antibiotics do is that they block an enzyme, and an enzyme is basically, you can think of it as a piece of machinery that helps run the bacteria. So when something jams up this piece of machinery, it stops working, and eventually after that stops working, it kills off the bacteria. That's the principle of how this works. So to think of a piece of machinery, I use an example of a wheel. Suppose I have a wheel of a car. If I have a circular boot, that's what this blue circle is, that fits around the wheel perfectly, it'll stop the wheel from turning and therefore stop the machinery. So if we think of the bacteria as the car, if we stop the wheel, it can't move and eventually it will starve to death and die. What happens when it's exposed to these antibiotics over and over and over again is that it evolves, and these enzymes that are targeted by that antibiotic will change shape. So suppose now the natural shape of this enzyme is a circle, and now it is an oval. If we use the same antibiotic, supposing that it's just a circle that encapsulates the smaller circle, it doesn't fit on the oval. So therefore it has thwarted the antibiotic. That's basically, in a nutshell, how antibiotic resistance works. So why should we not fear this? Most people, when they look at that and say, well, I should be afraid of that, shouldn't I? But this kind of resistance comes with a price. And to illustrate this example, I've come up with a hypothetical situation. So suppose we have two villages 500 years ago. We've got one village of people wearing armor, like this knight here. And the other village is just a village of unarmored people. And they've got to compete against each other. And the one rule is they cannot attack each other. So they're going to compete directly with each other. Who do you suppose will fare better? The people in armor or the unarmored people? Who is likely to win the competition and end up dominating the environment? Most people, if they don't think about it, would probably say the armored people. Say, well, they're just like the regular people except they're armored. But if you think about it, in most of the daily routines of these people's lives, the armor is going to be more of a hindrance than a help. Thinking of hunting in armor is going to be almost impossible to chase down some animal, and the noise that it would make and all of that. Farming, it's heavy. This armor could weigh 100 pounds. It's very, very heavy. So it's going to be a lot less efficient. Think about even just your regular job in this modern time. If you had to wear 100 pounds of armor, it's likely that you would probably be working less efficiently than your peers. But now take this in a very natural and cruel environment that these bacteria have to live in. It's a major burden. Think back to these wheel examples, thinking of it in the context of a vehicle. Anyone who's ever had some kind of ding on the rim of their tire knows that any circle that's not perfectly, or any wheel that is not perfectly round, you can't go very fast on it before it starts acting up. So while the bacterium has avoided the antibiotics, it comes at a price, at a heavy price. It's like wearing suits of armor in the natural world. And what happens is that the unarmored versions of that same bacteria are able to outcompete the armored versions. The only situation where the armored version would be superior is in a case where they're being attacked. The only case where this oval wheel would be superior to the round wheel is the case where there's an antibiotic present that stops the round wheel. So we can see that under normal circumstances, it is not worth the price of having all of these antibiotic resistance, of wearing all of this armor. And the only time that it's going to be an advantage is on a battlefield. And that's why these resistant bacteria are only found in hospitals, and if they're found outside the hospital, they're not there for very long because they're outcompeted by the wild type or the native species of bacteria that does not have that armor. In a natural environment, as I said before, it's very brutal, it's cutthroat. Every piece of energy counts. Imagine if there was a shortage of food or animals that were being hunted, and now it takes a lot of chasing to catch just one animal. All of these armored people will die off immediately. So that's the same thing with the bacterium, which is why it is only found in hospital environments or hospital-like environments, because in that situation they're being constantly attacked, which is a good situation for someone who is wearing armor. If they were out in the wilderness and it so happened to be raining arrows all the time, then it would be an advantage to wear the armor. If they don't have to compete against, or in a situation where they don't have to compete against round wheels, then the oval wheel is fine. But as soon as round wheels are there, then they are at a disadvantage. And this is why it's not really such a big concern for most healthy people about these resistant bacteriums. The only people that need to worry about it are immunocompromised people. But again, for these reasons, we won't have to worry anytime soon about there being a worldwide spreading of this bacterial antibiotic resistant bacterium into people's homes and other places besides a hospital setting. One more thing, some people will point out that a lot of common bacteria now is often resistant to one or two more types of antibiotic. And therefore they're continuing on logically that they'll continue to acquire more and more resistances to antibiotics until they're fully resistant as well. But that's not necessarily true. And to use the armor example again, the difference is like wearing a hard hat to wearing a full suit of armor. Most people can wear a hard hat and have it not really affect their energy expenditure much. And it's the same with bacteria. Some things may not be as drastic as changing the shape of a wheel on a car. It might be something else, changing the shape of a window, or some other thing that's a lot less energy intensive. So with something like that, and it's only one or two things that are not so energy intensive, then it may not be such a big deal. If you compare a village of people who are unarmored versus a village of people who just have a helmet on, the difference is probably not going to be so noticeable. So I thought I would add that on there to address that point before it gets brought up, because I know it will.